joining. Thanks for joining. How's it going, everybody? Okay. So we'll give another minute here, then we'll start going as more people start to trickle in. But welcome to the live Armbar workshop. So as we mentioned before, what we're going to do is, thanks for joining, what we're going to do is we're going to go over from start to finish, if you got Armbar, what to do about it, and as we go through and progress to the initial parts of the rehab. So we'll give another minute here, and then we'll kind of get going officially. So everybody, thanks for joining. If you have questions throughout it, just write them down. We'll note them. Hey, thanks for the wave. So ask your questions. We'll write them down and note them as we go through, and then towards the end we'll cover all the questions, because a lot of the stuff will start to get answered as we work through all this stuff, and as people start to trickle in, more stuff will come here and there, so we don't get too sporadic. All right, thanks for joining. All right, so let's get going. As people start to trickle in, that'll be all right. So my name's Dalton. I'm the starter of Grapplers Performance. So I'm a performance physical therapist, and so we started this clinic in order to help Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, all grappling athletes kind of help manage their injuries and get them back to training. I'm a grappler myself, wrestled for a long time, now I do Jiu-Jitsu, and just there's so many people in the sport that have either gotten bad advice or just have lingering issues because they can't get to the bottom of it, because they go to potential healthcare providers that don't understand the positions, don't understand what's going on, or they just don't go and see anybody. So we're here to help people get back to training and keep more people doing jiu-jitsu and wrestling and grappling sports, because we love them and we think they're great. So the workshop, how it's going to work, I'm quickly just going to cover the overview of the elbow, looking at basic movements. So we're back. So every single person will have a different injury, even though it's the same kind of mechanism of injury. So it's very, very important that each person gets an individual kind of assessment based on their background and what's going on in order to make the right decisions. So everything going forward, it's for information, helping you make the right decision and kind of understand things going forward with your own injuries, pain, and potentially others. So with that being said, let's start. So the overview of the elbow. So arm bars in general, of course, it's a hyperextension of the elbow joint. So the joint itself, it's a bone-on-bone joint. So as we go into full extension, we hit a block where bone runs into bone, and it can't go any further, okay? But the other thing that ends up happening with arm bars is we also get what we call this valgus movement, where the elbow itself starts to get pushed inwards. So we get this kind of movement. It really strains a lot of the tissues in this inside of the elbow. The four main movements that we're looking at with the elbow and how we start to test and clear a lot of these things is flexion. Of course, it should bend all the way up, and we should get a bend all the way up till we run into our bicep, kind of 160, 170 degrees is what we're looking at as normal. It should fully extend to neutral, what we call 0 degrees, if we draw a line through it straight, and we should actually have about a 10-degree hyperextension, 5 to 10-degree hyperextension in the elbow. We also get this pronation movement where the palm comes down. We should see that be able to rotate all the way this way, and then supination as the palm comes all the way up. So we get full movement. So in terms of the elbow itself, these are the movements that we're looking at, and these are the movements that get compromised with the injury, and that can help us lead to some of the structures that do get injured. In terms of the common structures that do get affected with arm bars, thanks for joining everybody, kind of keep up as we go. The common structures that do get injured with arm bars, both what we see but also what some of the research says. So there was a nice piece of research, Almeida was the author, and what he did is he went to his IBJJF national tournament, so elite level black belts, elite athletes, jiu-jitsu athletes, and everybody that got arm barred, they pulled them off. So injuries that they got out of the tournament because of an arm bar. And what they did is they assessed the elbow on the spot, and they followed them over a period of about 5 months, and they referred them all to an MRI, and then they also got another assessment for the MRI, and then got scanned. And they compared the results of the assessments to the MRI to see what structures were injured, and then compare them across the athletes so you can see some commonalities. And what they found with these, both in the assessment and before and after, is every single person had pain in their elbow after an armbar injury. Makes sense. Every single person had swelling, so that's a common symptom. But the 5 out of 6 of the athletes that ended up getting armbarred, they had damage or a partial rupture to their ulnar collateral ligament, so a ligament that runs across the inside medial part of the elbow, and that helps prevent this kind of valgus movement that we talked about that a lot of people in the arm bars, they end up getting put their elbow on. So a lot of people had a rupture to the ulnar collateral ligament, even though they didn't necessarily have instability in the elbow when it was tested. Also, almost all of them, I think 5 out of 6, they had a common flexor tendon damage as well. And so there's 3 muscles that run into the forearm that flex the wrist and flex the fingers, and that common tendon comes into the inside part of this elbow right through here, and that also had damage to it. Some people ruptured it as well. Those are the most common structures that we saw injured from that research. Also from the athletes that we've worked with, what we also typically see potentials are the bicep tendon. As it comes down, it inserts into this lower forearm. So as we get armbarred, sometimes that bicep tendon gets injured and overstrained. Same thing with some of the flexor tendons, other flexor tendons of the wrist and the fingers. Also, the ulnar nerve comes down through this medial elbow complex as well. So sometimes we see traction injuries where that nerve itself gets overpulled, overstretched, and we'll see damaged and symptoms from the damage that was caused to the ulnar nerve. So those are other structures that we looked at. And then the other big ones that come out of it in the research and when we assess people's elbows is because of that bone-on-bone mechanism, there's a potential for fractures, bony injuries, and also avulsion fractures where those tendons pull off at the bone. So we also need to clear and check those. So that's our first step. When we look at any armbar injury, if it's acute or even if it's been lingering there for a while, you have to clear and make sure there's no bony injuries because that sends you down a different path of rehab, and we need to make sure that we're doing the right steps and we're not missing out on some of the potential serious things. So looking at the research is another really easy way to test for fractures, and this is how we do it. There's 3 tests overall, and the research showed that it had a 98% sensitivity, so meaning it ruled in. So 98% of the time, if you failed these tests, it picked up the fractures, and it had about a 70% specificity, which rules it out. So if you pass these tests, 70% of the time you did not have a fracture. Or you're 70% likely to not have a fracture. So it's not perfect, but it's very, very accurate in terms of picking them up. It's a very simple test that we can do. You can also do on yourself to kind of help make a decision. Before we get to the test, it's also important to note that we also consider what we call an index of suspicion. So if something just seems not quite right, or kind of there's any weirdness factor to it, that's also an indication. Just go get an x-ray, go clear it, make sure that there's nothing going on there, because there can be some hairline and some other microfractures that happen that don't necessarily get picked up. So if you feel like it's not right, if there's excessive bruising, excessive swelling, you can't make a full grip, things like that, just go get an x-ray and clear your elbow. So with that being said, here's the quick test that we start out with. So the extension test is number 1, number 2 is a 4-way range of movement test, and then number 3 is kind of just point tenderness on the actual elbow point. The extension test and the 4-way range of movement test overlap with each other, so we just incorporate them all into one test, and that's the 4-way range of movement test. So how we do that is we look at the 4 ranges of the elbow and making sure that we have full range of movement compared to the uninjured side. So if my left elbow gets armbarred and injured, I'm comparing all my movements to what my right side can do if that's normal, if I don't have a lingering issue there as well. So we look at flexion. So in the research it says we should be able to get up to 90 degrees in the elbow, so 90 degrees here. I like to see that it can go over 90 degrees and that we can actually make contact with the bicep. It's just a margin of error of safety that I like to see on that. Again, also comparing it to the other side. Extension, we should be able to bring our arms up to the side, 90 degrees. We should be able to fully lock out and extend the elbow and get full contact where we can't go, potentially even hyperextend. With some pain symptoms that happen after arm bars, we might not get that hyperextension, but if we get to full extension neutral, that's a clear test. The other 2 movements, we have pronation and supination. So again, comparing to the other side, with our arm up, we should be able to rotate the thumbs all the way down, and we should be able to get the palms all the way up. If we're missing range of movement in any of these range of movement tests, it's an indication that there's a potential for a fracture. You go in and get an x-ray. The other thing that we couple it with is also point tenderness. So the most common site for fracture is as the end of the humerus comes down and meets with the ulna, so it makes this elbow joint here. In this area, because that bone on bone starts to cup right in there, that's where we get the fracture. So if you have any point tenderness around these bones on the side, on the front, or down on the back through here, and you can kind of see the bony points that come in through here, any point tenderness through there, also potential indication for fracture. You couple it with the range of movement test, go get an x-ray. So clear yourself first. If there's any doubt at all, just go in and see a doctor. Don't try and diagnose yourself with these things if it feels odd, and most people have an idea if something feels not quite right, or if it's just kind of a minor strain, we have some minimal pain, but we have usually full range of movement, but there's some limitations. So once we clear ourselves of those fractures, once we make sure there's no bony injury, we get an x-ray, whatever we need to do, and it's just soft tissue injury, now we can start to look at the area that gets injured, and what to do about it. So in general, our rehab process follows a pretty similar plan for most people, and just we plug and play the exercise or specifics as we go, depending on the injuries that we get. Because arm bars themselves are so common, one, but two, the structures that get injured are very, very common and similar across the board. We see this kind of big blanket of structures that get injured, and it's in the medial elbow complex, so most of the issues happen on this inside. The flexor tendons, as we talked about, the ulnar nerve, as we talked about, this bicep as it inserts, and just the joint itself gets irritated, swollen, and painful. So the process that we go through to rehab any athlete from that first point of injury, from acute injury or when they come and see us, to getting back and returning to where they want to be, training full-time, weightlifting, competing, whatever that athlete's doing, we always go through this kind of three-step building process. And that first phase that we go in, that first step, is it's about control of symptoms and normalizing the range of movement of the joint, or normalizing the movement in general. And so in the elbow itself, controlling pain, controlling swelling, and normalizing full extension, full flexion, supination, and pronation pain-free. That's that first phase that we go into. That second phase is we start to build up the joint and strengthen the structures that are potentially injured, and then we go on and we create a maintenance and a way to sustain that improvement over time to prevent further injuries. Today, this workshop, we're going over that first phase. So we're going over those initial steps we take to control pain, swelling, and normalize the range of movement as much as we can. So usually that's kind of first week to 2 weeks of rehab that we bring athletes through. So we're going to go over that now. In that first phase, that controlling of pain and normalizing range of movement, we focus on 3 areas of the actual damaged tissues. First, we treat the joint as a main limiter and contributor to pain and symptoms. Then we treat the soft tissues that might also contribute to the symptoms and limit the range of movement. And then after that, we focus on muscle activation in those new opened up ranges in that pain-free range of movement, which makes it more permanent and starts to control the symptoms of the joint. Treatment. So with the armbar, typically when people present with armbar injuries, they can't fully extend their elbow without pain towards the end of range, and they can't fully bend their elbow without pain towards the end of range. So 2 ways we like to reduce that pain and open up that movement to get it back to completely full is we want to use joint distraction, or a technique called mobilization with movement. So we're going to try to gap the joint or add traction to the joint or pressure to the joint in order to help it move more completely. And so a couple simple ways we do that. I like to use a band and a towel, and we're going to go over those now. So if you have a band, an exercise band, it's an easy way to do it. The heavier the better. And so what I like to do as you sit, double up your band here and put it through your foot so you control the tension with your foot. And we're going to load this up right at the base end of our elbow, so we come down through here. Boom. So when I step down the foot, the band should be pulling the lower part of my arm down and away. And so that joint itself, as it sits in through here, this lower part of the arm, the band's going to pull it, and we're just going to start to get a little tiny gap. And it doesn't move that much. There's a lot of tissues around there that control it. It's super stable, but we'll just get that little bit of force that also helps calm the nervous system down and controls pain. So what we do is we add tension on the band, should be pulling away, and what we're going to do here is with this traction in the band, we're going to start to try and force our arm this way, extending the elbow, and we should feel a very gentle kind of global stretch or global pull in the actual elbow joint, and that's how we know we're doing it correctly. So as we come through, we'll try and extend the elbow as much as we can, or if you're injured and you have pain, go to that onset of pain. We're going to hold, and then we're going to come off it just a little bit. And we're going to spend about 2 minutes just repeating nice and slow, trying to work our elbow into full extension with this band distracting the joint and pulling on it. And what you'll notice is after 2 minutes, as you keep working through it, when I start, my elbow will be kind of at a bend. I won't have full kind of extension of it without pain. So as we start to work through, what you'll notice is you'll have to keep working further and further into elbow extension in order to find that pain point. And so after 2 minutes, what we typically see is the elbow joint will open up, the pain point will reduce, and we'll get full extension back that's much less painful than it was before, if any at all. A lot of times we see a big resolution of symptoms with this. People will come in with kind of 4 or 5 pain levels, out of 10. And then as we start to work through these joint mobilizations, it drops down to 2 1s, and sometimes even 0s, gets rid of it completely. So this is our first mobilization. We're going to work into extension, use the band to gap the joint. Like I said, 2 minutes here, and we're going to keep working into extension, just nice and slow, in and out, and we should feel a global stretch in and around that joint. That's what we're working on, okay? With all of these, I did forget to mention what we want to do in order to make sure we're on the right track is we test and retest before we go through all this stuff. So this first phase, I'm going to bring you through the joint, soft tissue, and then the muscle activation work. What we want to do is wherever we're limited, so say my left elbow got injured, I'm going to test how far I can bend it, I'm going to test how far I can extend it to pain, and I'm going to make a note of my pain levels. So if 10's the worst I can imagine, 0's none at all, whatever that pain point is to you, I'm going to make a note of it. So say when I bend my elbow, it hurts and it makes me about a 5 or 6 pain level, I'm going to note that, and when I extend my elbow all the way, I can't quite get it all the way into extension, and it hurts maybe like a 7 or an 8. So I'm going to make note of that, because what we should see is as we work through these initial steps, 1, we should improve that range of movement, but 2, those pain levels should drastically drop. So we make note of them before, we retest after to make sure we're doing the right things and we're on the right track. So that's the first one, extension, distraction. Using a band to do that's a really helpful way. Thanks everybody for joining. You're right in the middle. So that next piece, so we worked on elbow extension, so we want to distract the joint as we go into extension. Just from that, you should feel like the elbow's already starting to open up, should feel a bit lighter, and you should feel less pain as you're going into an extension position. So it's a good place to start. The second thing we go to, working on that joint, remember we're still in that first step, that joint phase, is we want to do the same concept where we want to gap the joint and distract it as we work into a fully flexed position. Okay, and how we do that, super simple. Grab a towel and put it into your elbow pit. We went over this, we posted this video on Instagram this week. It's the same thing. You might have to roll up the towel a little bit thicker depending on how big your arm is, or thinner, just to get the right kind of stretch. What we're trying to do is create a block in the elbow joint, so as we bend it, it creates a point that the elbow bends around, and we get a gapping at the joint back here. So we pull the towel tight, we're going to come all the way up, and we're going to overpressure on our wrist. And when we do, if we're doing it right, or if the towel's right, again, we should start to feel kind of this global pull, pressure, stretch. A lot of people describe it differently in the elbow itself. So as you go down, we're going to push, and we should feel a stretch. And this one we're going to do a little bit different. We're going to do it in a P&F pattern, or a contract-relax pattern, in order to use reflexes to calm down the elbow. So pull the towel down. As we push here, we're going to push for 6 seconds, looking for that global kind of stretch in the elbow. We push for 6 seconds. And at the end of 6 seconds, so 4, 5, 6, we hold the pressure. We don't come off of it, but we're going to just not push quite as hard. We're going to take a small break, about 1 or 2 seconds, and then we're going to increase the pressure again for another 6 seconds, which should increase that stretch in the elbow. So we do that again, 6 seconds. So we take another pause, hold the position, and then repeat again. So add pressure, 6 seconds, 3, 2, 1, okay, 6. Then we pause again, holding the position, and we're going to repeat this 10 to 20 times, so for a minute or 2 minutes. And each time we push, we should feel like the elbow will give a little bit more and a little bit more, and then we're going to run into almost a block where it's not going to move anymore, but we continue to add that pressure and keep going. And the towel creates a little bit of a gap. The joint itself should feel like we get its global pressure and stretch. Once we finish, we ease off the elbow, get it to shake it out, get blood back in it. And again, just like the extension distraction, it should feel looser, the elbow should feel lighter, and we should move that pain point. So before, if I'm getting pain maybe at 120, 130 degrees of elbow flexion, that pain point should come on much later, so I maybe have to bend it up to 140, 150 before that pain point comes on the elbow, giving us an indication we're moving in the right direction and we're bringing those symptoms down like we want. So that first phase, that joint phase, those are the 2 things we like to include in, which helps a lot of people. There's other techniques that we use, but it's just dependent on the person. This is what helps the majority of the cases that we do see when people come in with armbar injuries. So extension, distraction, flexion, distraction, and that's the joint work that we start with. Following the joint work, remember we move on to that next step, is the soft tissue. So we start to address the soft tissues that might be, one, either causing pain and sensitivity, or they might be contributing to a reduction or a restriction of the elbow movement itself. So the big movers of the elbows, of course, we have the biceps, we have the triceps. One is a compression, or what you've probably seen of voodoo flossing. It's a compression wrapping technique. We're pushing all the blood and all the potential stagnant swelling, and we're getting everything out. And then as we unwrap the band, we get a fresh flush of blood, fluid, liquid movement. It feels lighter. It helps reduce pain, helps calm the nervous system down, and it helps to open up that movement. So that's the first step we do to kind of help manage the soft tissues that might be contributing to some of the pain and limitation in your movement. So you can get one of these on Amazon. They're super cheap. But how we like to do it is we like to start inside and we wrap towards the outside. The most common area that we do get pain and structure, like we talked about, is that medial elbow complex. So that's the part where we're going to try to put most attention of the band, and that's the part where we're going to kind of target as we wrap. So what we want to do is we start distally, so towards the hand, and we're going to wrap up towards the body, and it can help flush the lymph system and any kind of stagnant healing factors that are in there. So we start. It's a lot easier if you have somebody wrap it for you. But as we come down and we get tension on this band, the band itself, so if I stretch it 100%, I'm going to back off half. So we do 50% pressure on the band, and we're going to overlap the band by 50% as well. So the other piece underneath it, so 50% stretch, 50% overlap, and I'm going to wrap around. And what I'm going to do is we're going to target this medial elbow complex, so these kind of common flexor tendons in through here, and we're going to come up in and around this lower bicep and kind of tricep area as we come inside the middle of the elbow. So I'm going to come across, tension the band, come over those tissues, and I'm going to come above the elbow. So then when I come back down, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to cross those medial tissues. So now I've created this kind of X pattern above and below on those tissues. So now I'm below again, so 50% overlap. I'm going to go above the elbow, come back down, and when I do this again, 50%, and I overlap the band 50% again, and come through. And we keep working, and we're trying to kind of create the smallest window here on the actual elbow joint that we can. So we keep going back and forth, adding pressure. Now with this, because we're cutting off some sort of blood supply, it's important if we get any weirdness, change of sensation, pins and needles, things like that, we take the band off immediately. The other thing we can check for is capillary refill. So you pinch your fingers, and when you pinch, you should see blood come back into the nail bed. If you don't have that, it's too tight, take it off, redo it, and reduce the tension on it. So from here, now we have a lot of tension on the elbow itself across these tissues. So what we're going to try and do is we do 3 sets of 20 repetitions. So we're going to go all the way up, all the way into extension, all the way up, all the way into extension. We're going to work on this 20 repetitions. It should feel tight. It should feel a little bit painful but manageable, and you might feel pressure starting to build in the lower hand. That's okay. So we're going to do 20 up and down, and then what we're going to start doing is combining a rotation movement. So we're going to go palm towards our face and palm away like this. Again, going all the way through the range that we can manage. We're going to do this 20 times, and at the end of the 20, we're also going to rotate the opposite way. So we're going to start palm away, and we're going to come palm up, which then starts to mimic that armbar position. And so what we should start to feel, a lot of tension, a lot of pain, not pain but discomfort, kind of up to a 4 or 5's out of okay, and we should start to feel it really, really working on this inside if we put the tension on the band correct. So we do 20 repetitions through this. That's our third set of 20, and then we're going to take that band off. And this should take kind of 2 or 3 minutes to go through. Again, any pins and needles, change of sensation, things like that, you take it off. And then from here, shake it out with this. It should already, the joint itself should feel lighter, feel looser, and again, those pain points in terms of flexion and extension should start to move further and further away if they're there at all. A lot of times we get symptom resolution with this, so it does start to feel better, and you can see as we do it, we get this nice bright pink line where we have the band. That's fresh blood coming in. It feels lighter, looser, and it helps us to open up all the soft tissues and the sliding surfaces of that elbow that are affected. So that's our first step. The hand will normalize, we'll come back, and we're going to move on to the other soft tissue techniques that we start to work on. The next thing we like to do is address the muscle tissues themselves. So that compression flossing helps with the sliding surfaces and opens up movement for all the tissues. The next thing we like to do is actually work on the muscles themselves that contribute into this joint movement. So a portion of what we do see with the movement restriction is the muscles themselves. When we have a joint irritation, we do see some kind of muscle guarding is what kind of we describe it as. So the muscles themselves tense up, and you almost get this kind of protective mechanism around the joint to reduce use of it. Helpful at first, but as we move out of an acute stage, what we want to do is help to relax that muscle and open up that range of movement so we can start that rehab process and getting the joint operating correctly without these lingering kind of chronic issues and reduction of joint movement. Hey Greg, thanks for joining. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on these common flexors. Also, this helps with pain reduction and pain management, and we're going to focus on the bicep itself also. Two of the structures that the tendons, we also see damage to those tendons with this hyperextension injury. So the best way to do this with a kettlebell or with a barbell, add pressure across the muscles. So if you have a kettlebell, set the kettlebell down, and you're going to add pressure so the kettlebell handle comes right across the inside of the forearm. Kettlebell works nicely. It has a big white handle. You could also do the same thing with the barbell, or if you have something a bit thinner, you can also use that. I like to use a base like this. It's really thin, easy base, and it helps me get kind of more point specific on the elbow. So we would set this on the table or on the ground. We're going to get those muscle tissues. So this lays right across it like this. So if the muscle tissues run this way, we want this to be perfectly perpendicular. And what we're going to do is we're going to add pressure on top of it. And we're looking for any sensitive area. So any place where you add pressure on the muscle and we're getting kind of sensitivity, a little pain response, anything like that feels uncomfortable, that's what we want to go after. So we add as much pressure as we can manage. And what we want to do is we're going to shear the tissues side to side across that kettlebell handle, that barbell, kind of a skinnier point-specific bar, anything you can find to add pressure on it. And we're going to shear across those muscles 10 times. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make a fist and we're going to extend and flex or move the wrist up and down 10 times. And what that's going to do is we're going to add pressure on top of the muscle, then ask that muscle to contract and relax underneath it. And what we end up seeing is that muscle tension that ends up building up, it starts to relax off. It improves our range of movement in our wrist. It improves the symptoms of pain in the elbow, and it can actually improve the range of movement in the elbow as well, bringing that pain and that nervous system sensitivity down. So we're going to address the inside part of our forearm muscles, those flexor muscles. Okay, so we work in three sections moving towards the wrist. So we're going to start that up near the elbow. Remember, we're shearing across it 10 times with pressure on it, bending and flexing the wrist 10 times. And then we're going to move down about a third, do the same thing, and then we do one more, move down a third, same thing, shear, and then wrist up and down 10 times. And we're looking for those sensitive areas. So we do that inside of that forearm, and then the next thing we do is we go up to the bicep and do the same thing. This is easiest when you lie on your on your back, and you're going to lie with your arm out to the side, place a barbell or a kettlebell upside down on it, or get any kind of pressure of a bar or anything heavy across the bicep. The same concept applies. You start at the distal end of the bicep, so towards the hand. You're going to add pressure on it. We're going to shear across that muscle 10 times. So with this, it works better if you have a thicker bar. These I just use for elbows. We're going to come across the arm like this 10 times. And then what we're going to do is then we're going to straighten and bend the elbow 10 times. And this will be nice and sensitive. It's going to hurt a little bit, be a little bit gritty in there. It doesn't feel fantastic. After you finish, it should help to open up that movement. Again, it'll move that pain point further away. And this is the last thing we do to address that soft tissue. So we do the compression flossing, then we do the smashing or kind of the tack and flossing over the muscle itself. We do the forearm, and then we do the bicep. The bicep itself, we do it in 3 to 4 sections as well. So we'll start here, and then we're going to move up towards the shoulder, and that final one will be kind of where that bicep inserts in the shoulder through here. So that's the soft tissue work. Again, as we move through, that's the second part. We treated the joint. Then we came through, now we're addressing the soft tissues with the compression flossing and the tack and flossing, the moving underneath it, through the forearm, through the bicep. Again, we're retesting. That movement should improve, the pain point should improve, and we should feel like things are starting to open up and move in the right direction. We might still have a little bit of pain towards the end of range. A lot of people, we end up getting kind of 1s and 2s pain thresholds, sometimes 0s. So it's really manageable. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but it's nowhere near as acutely painful as it was when we started. And so once we get to that point with the joint and soft tissue work, then we move on to that muscle activation component of that initial phase. So a big part of what people struggle with, what we see when arm bars come through, is it's okay in these ranges, and then once we get towards this position where we got injured, so full extension, we get big pains and symptom reproduction and potential that lingers and kind of carries on for a couple days, puts people out of action for a couple days. And we also get this kind of over sensitivity with the elbow coming in. So a lot of people, as their frames get smashed or people are on top of them like this, when that elbow gets flexed, we see this big kind of increase in pain and around the elbow as well. And so what we're trying to do is calm those symptoms down, and then we're going to start to load the joint in those end of ranges so that when we get to those positions here, or when we get to the elbow extension here, those muscles feel strong and secure there, and we get less of a pain response. So going through those first phases, joint and soft tissue, that'll bring us to this third phase of muscle activation, where it should be mostly pain-free to get all the way into extension, all the way into flexion. And so we ask the muscles to work really, really hard at those end of ranges, and it makes that new change into that new range of movement more permanent. We see it carry across for longer. A lot of times what ends up happening is we do a lot of soft tissue work, foam rolling, lacrosse balls, stretching, banded work, all this stuff, and then we leave it and we go do a workout, do whatever, then we come back, we still have pain, so we continue to do those. But what we're not doing is following up and activating the muscle and the nervous system in those new ranges that we're opening up, which gets us to a point where we don't have to do all that foam rolling and soft tissue work on a daily or weekly basis, and we get out of that pain cycle that we get into. So that third phase, muscle activation, what do we do? End of range loading. So end of range loading into full elbow straightening, end of range loading into full elbow bending. You can do this with dumbbells, kettlebells, any weight. I like to do it with a band because it's more of a consistent pressure on it. And so, super simple way to do it. So we start with elbow bending, grab a band and step on it. And what we want to do is have the band, so wherever we start, there's tension on it. So right now my muscles are having to work in order to have this band in my hand. As we go through the range, it should increase. And what I'm looking for is at what point in the range of bending my elbow does that pain response come on. It should be towards the end of the range now that we've done all the soft tissue work, but it might kind of reset itself a little bit now that we're loading the muscles so much. So we go through elbow flexion, hold. I'll get a pain response, and I'm going to hold it here, okay, for a good 20 seconds. Okay, so I'll count, put a timer on. We want to make sure that we have plenty of time. And what we should see is that pain response that we're getting should slowly start to decrease over that 20 seconds. At the end of the 20 seconds, I can help control the arm back down, and then I'm going to repeat. Come back up, looking for that pain response, and what we should see is it should go a little bit further before that pain kicks on. So again, I'll hold for another 20 seconds, holding that pain, and we should see it start to tail off, droop down, lower. At the end of 20 seconds, I'll come back down, and then I'm going to repeat one more to get me a full minute of time under load for those muscles, tendons, structures, etc. So I'll come back up, again looking for that pain point. I should get near, if not full range of movement, and again I'm going to hold it. I should feel like my biceps under tension, it's wanting to give way. I'm going to find that new pain point, hold it for 20 seconds, again, which should tail off, lower down, and then I'll come off of it, relax, give my muscle time to reset, calm down again, and I'll retest, and I should see I have full pain, full range of movement without pain. It should move that target again, and the elbow itself should feel more in control, should feel more stable, like you have more movement without those pain responses. Following the elbow flexion, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to go into extension. So how we do this, same thing. So the elbow itself, we want to make sure that we're loaded up as we go all the way through its range. So I can tie it to something on top of me. I can hold it with my arm. Anything you can do to secure the band above you. What you're going to do is, again, as I start my movement, so from this position, I already have tension on the elbow. And so what I'm going to do is here, and I'm going to try to fully extend it by pushing the hand down, but also trying to push the arm and shoulder forward a little bit. So as I do that, I'm going to go until I find that initial pain point, and I'm going to hold, same process, 20 seconds. The tricep should work pretty hard here. 20 seconds, and that pain should slowly come down, and then I'll come off, kind of reset, and I'm going to restart. So I'll do 3 sets of 20 seconds, just like the flexion. And what I'm trying to do is get into full elbow extension, so my elbow should get to a fully locked position, and I should be able to hold it for 20 seconds, and any pain that's there will start to come down. And what I'm looking for is kind of a full resolution of pain as we go through the full range of extension and flexion. So we'll do 3 sets of 20 seconds there. That, and then we finish, rotate off the arm. And now from the beginning, when we tested, remember we tested our flexion, where was it? Kind of 140, 150 degrees. We should see an improvement, getting up to kind of 160, maybe 170. Extension, maybe we were lacking 5 or 10. We should see full neutral or even potentially hyperextension. And then also the pain levels associated with the movement should drop down substantially as well. Those are some of the key indicators. We're on the right track, we're doing the right things, and we're helping the system itself start to calm down and reducing those pain levels and symptoms. That allows us to start to load the joint correctly and gets us into that next phase where we can really start to target and strengthen the structures that were potentially injured. So either flexor tendons, bicep tendons, nerve issues, ulnar collateral ligament, any medial elbow complex that got compromised. We can start to add load through there to start to stimulate the tissues to re-strengthen and re-heal. That's our first phase. That's it. So we got us all the way through. So joint work, soft tissue work, and then muscle activation in the end. The overall rehab, this first phase that we did to kind of control symptoms and normalize range of movement, they include those 3 steps, and that's how we progress athletes through. So we did the joint work first, extending the elbow as we had that banded traction, flexing the elbow as we had the traction from the towel. Then we went into the soft tissue work, doing compression flossing, tacking and flossing across the common flexors. Same with the bicep as we bend and straighten the elbow. So shearing 10 times, moving the elbow 10 times for the wrist. And then we move to that muscle activation where we do end of range loading into flexion, end of range loading into extension, and we retest. We should open up movement. We should reduce pain threshold. And we continue to do that. Usually our prescription is kind of once or twice a day for that first week, and that should really bring the symptoms of the elbow under control and get us in a position where we can start a really good rehab program to build up the elbow and get it pain-free and lasting through workouts and anything we want to do without flare-ups and sensitivity. So that's it, pretty straightforward. Again, we'll send out a replay link for all this stuff if you joined in halfway and missed it, kind of walking you through the process. Or if you have any questions, it's a good time, just type them in. We'll kind of go over questions. Question and answers will be here for the next kind of 5-10 minutes, 7 minutes really till 12:45. So if you have any specific questions, let us know. Hope it helped a little bit, kind of helped clear up some initial steps, what to look for, and when to kind of go in and get further assistance for your armbar injury, and any first steps that can help you kind of get your pain and symptoms under control and get you in a place where you can start making right movements towards getting back to full capacity. Like I said, any questions, let me know, kind of linger around, or feel free to send us a message. As a part, also, we sent out emails and kind of texts to some of the people that have been following up this kind of Armbar month, and all this information we put out and wrapping up this workshop. We're offering a free initial assessment for kind of any elbow injury or potential other injury you might have. If you're struggling with it, let us know. Just message us after this, and we'll organize everything and get in touch. But for now, that's it. That was the kind of process we go through to get everything working in the right direction. And so if you have questions, let us know. Thanks for joining. And next month, we are going to be working on new topics, and not arm bars. We're going to be working on something else, common injuries. So keep an eye out for